Everyone at the party looked at me with pity as my ex-boyfriend announced his engagement, mocking me for being alone. They had no idea that the terrifying man currently surrounded by armed guards outside wasn't there to kill everyone, but was simply waiting for his husband, me, to finish his drink. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you love stories about sweet revenge, hidden identities, and possessive mafia alphas who would burn the world down for their partners, you are in the right place. We have a brand new series starting today that is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. Before we dive into the drama, please make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. Now, let's get into the story. Part 1. The Wedding Crasher. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Oakhaven Hotel ballroom glittered like frozen tears, casting a cold, artificial light over the city's elite. The air smelled of expensive perfume, stale champagne, and the underlying, suffocating scent of judgment. For Elian, standing near the buffet table and clutching a glass of sparkling water like a lifeline, the evening was nothing short of torture. He shouldn't have come. He knew that. But when the invitation arrived, thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing, his foolish heart had hoped for closure. Or perhaps he just wanted to prove that he wasn't the broken, discarded thing everyone whispered he was. Well, look who decided to show his face. The voice was like oil slick over gravel. Elian stiffened, his knuckles turning white around his glass. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Marcus, the alpha who had promised him forever, only to dump him via text message 6 months ago because Elian was too plain and lacked ambition. Elian turned slowly, forcing a polite smile onto his face. Marcus stood there, looking undeniably handsome in a bespoke tuxedo, his arm wrapped possessively around a stunning, petite omega with platinum blonde hair. This was Julian, the son of the mayor. Marcus's upgrade. "Hello, Marcus," Elian said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his knees. "Congratulations on the engagement." Marcus sneered, scanning Elian's simple, off-the-rack navy suit with disdain. "I'm surprised you could afford a ticket to get in, Elian. Or are you working the catering staff tonight?" Julian giggled, a sharp, cruel sound. "Oh, stop it, honey. Be nice. Maybe he's here looking for a sugar daddy. Although, with that outfit, he'd be lucky to find a sugar uncle." A few people nearby chuckled. The humiliation burned Elian's cheeks, hot and stinging. This was their game. They were the golden couple, the alpha heir and the mayor's son, and Elian was just the dirt on their shoes. "I'm just here to wish you well," Elian said quietly, his eyes lowering. He just wanted to leave. He checked his watch. He was supposed to be here by now. Checking the time, Marcus stepped closer, his alpha pheromones flaring in a wave of dominance designed to make Elian submit. "Got a bus to catch? Or are you realizing how pathetic you look standing here all alone?" "I'm not alone," Elian whispered, though it sounded weak even to his own ears. "Oh, please," Marcus laughed, raising his voice so the surrounding guests could hear. "Elian, face it. You were always a placeholder. A boring, beta-like omega with nothing to offer. Look at you. No scent, no money, no connections. And now, no husband, no boyfriend, just a pathetic ex crashing my engagement party." The room went silent. The chatter died down. All eyes were on them. Elian felt stripped bare, the weight of 100 judgmental stares pressing down on him. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He wouldn't give Marcus the satisfaction. "You're right, Marcus," Elian said, lifting his chin. "I don't fit in here." "Then leave," Julian hissed, waving his hand dismissively. "Go back to your little apartment and your sad little life. Let the real adults celebrate." Elian turned to go, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt small, worthless. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe he was just. Boom. The heavy double doors of the ballroom didn't just open. They were thrown open with such force that they slammed against the walls, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of pure, unadulterated terror. For men walked in first. They were massive, wearing black suits that strained against their muscles, earpieces coiled behind their ears. They didn't look like hotel security. They looked like predators. They fanned out, their eyes scanning the room with cold precision. Then he walked in. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his pitch-black Italian suit perfectly. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, slicked back, revealing a face that was devastatingly handsome but carved from granite. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, cold and merciless. Dominic, the Reaper Valenti, the head of the Valenti crime family, the most powerful alpha in the city, the man who owned half the politicians in this room and terrified the other half. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The mayor, Julian's father, dropped his champagne glass. It shattered, but no one moved. No one breathed. Even Marcus looked pale, his arrogance evaporating instantly. Why was the Don here? This was a socialite engagement party, not a mafia summit. Dominic didn't look at the mayor. He didn't look at the trembling guests. He walked into the room with the casual confidence of a lion entering a pen of sheep. His heavy footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Click, click, click. He stopped in the center of the room. His gaze swept over the crowd, terrifying and intense, until it landed on the trio near the buffet table. Marcus, assuming the Don was looking at him, the host, straightened his spine, trying to salvage some dignity. "And Mr. Valenti," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking. We are honored. I didn't know you were invited to my—" "Quiet," Dominic said. It wasn't a shout. It was a low rumble, barely above a whisper, but it carried more power than a scream. Marcus clamped his mouth shut instantly. Dominic ignored him completely. He kept walking. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, people practically tripping over themselves to get out of his path. Elian stood frozen. His heart wasn't beating, it was vibrating. He watched as the most dangerous man in the city walked straight toward him. Marcus's eyes widened. He looked from Dominic to Elian, confusion warring with fear. "Mr. Valenti," Marcus tried again, stepping slightly in front of Elian as if to shield the Don from seeing such a lowly creature. "I apologize if this waiter is bothering you. I was just kicking him out." Dominic stopped. He turned his head slowly, looking at Marcus for the first time. The look was so full of disdain, so full of lethal intent, that Marcus actually took a step back. "Waiter," Dominic repeated, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. "Yes," Julian squeaked, trying to help his fiancée. "He's just an ex. A nobody. We were just telling him to leave." Dominic tilted his head. A dark, terrifying smirk played on his lips. He reached into his pocket. The security guards tensed, hands hovering near their jackets. But Dominic didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a handkerchief. A white, silk handkerchief. He stepped past Marcus, effectively shoving the alpha aside with his shoulder, and stopped directly in front of Elian. The terrifying aura softened the moment his gray eyes met Elian's wide, amber ones. "You're late," Elian whispered, his voice barely audible. "Traffic was murder," Dominic replied, his voice dropping an octave, becoming smooth, deep, and intimate. "And I had to deal with a pest." To the absolute shock of everyone in the room, the ruthless mafia lord reached out and gently, so gently it looked like he was handling glass, wiped a microscopic smudge of dirt from Elian's cheek with the silk handkerchief. "Did they upset you, Tesoro?" Dominic asked, his thumb lingering on Elian's jawline. Elian bit his lip, looking at Marcus's pale, horrified face. They said I didn't belong here, Dom. They said I had no one." Dominic hummed a low, dangerous sound that vibrated in his chest. He slowly turned around, wrapping a heavy, possessive arm around Elian's waist, pulling him flush against his hard body. He looked at Marcus, then at Julian, and finally addressed the entire room. "You said he had no one?" Dominic asked, his voice booming through the silent hall. He held up his left hand. On his ring finger sat a thick band of black platinum. Then, he grabbed Elian's left hand and lifted it. On Elian's finger, which he had been hiding in his pocket all night, was a matching ring. A massive, rare black diamond set in platinum. "Let me introduce you properly," Dominic said, his eyes locking onto Marcus's terrified gaze. "This is not your ex. This is not a nobody." He pulled Elian closer, planting a kiss on his temple, marking him for everyone to see. "This is Elian Valenti, my husband, and the other master of this city." The silence shattered. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. Julian looked like he was going to faint. "And," Dominic continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that only Marcus and Elian could hear, "I heard you made my husband cry." "Marcus, was it?" Dominic smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Pray that I'm in a good mood. Because right now, I feel like burning this whole building down." Elian looked up at Dominic, feeling the warmth of his body, the safety of his scent, sandalwood and gunpowder. For the first time that night, he didn't feel small. He felt untouchable. But the night was just beginning, and Marcus wasn't the only enemy in the room. As Dominic led Elian toward the VIP section, ignoring the stunned guests, Elian caught the eye of a man standing in the shadows of the balcony. A man with a scar running down his face. The man raised a glass to Elian, a sinister smile on his face. Dominic tightened his grip on Elian's waist. "Don't look at him, Elian." "Who is he?" Elian whispered. "The reason I was late," Dominic growled. "And the reason we aren't staying long. The war has started, Elian, and they know you are my weakness." End of part 1. Part 2. The target on his back. The silence in the ballroom was brittle, like glass about to shatter. Dominic's arm was a heavy, reassuring weight around Elian's waist as he guided him away from the stunned crowd. Every step they took felt like a declaration of war against the city's social hierarchy. Elian could feel the eyes boring into his back, eyes filled with envy, fear, and confusion. Marcus was still standing by the buffet table, his face a mask of pale horror. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd been juggling grenades thinking they were apples. As they passed him, Dominic paused. He didn't turn his whole body. He just turned his head slightly, casting a glance over his shoulder that was sharp enough to cut bone. "Enjoy your party, Marcus," Dominic said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly polite. "And check your bank accounts in the morning. I believe the Venetti contract you were bragging about earlier has just been terminated." Marcus's knees actually buckled. He reached out to grab the table for support, knocking over a tray of champagne flutes. The crash of breaking glass echoed through the hall, a perfect soundtrack to his ruined ambitions. Dominic didn't wait for a response. He swept Elian out of the ballroom, past the trembling doorman, and into the cool night air. Outside, the atmosphere changed instantly. The luxury of the hotel vanished, replaced by the grim reality of Dominic's world. A convoy of 3 black armored SUVs was waiting at the curb, engines idling with a low, predatory growl. Dozens of men in dark suits stood in a perimeter, their hands resting near their waistbands, eyes scanning every shadow. "Get in," Dominic murmured, opening the back door of the middle SUV. He practically lifted Elian inside, shielding his body with his own, as if he expected a sniper on the roof. As soon as the heavy door slammed shut, sealing them in the soundproof, leather-scented interior, the mask dropped. Dominic let out a long, shaky breath and immediately pulled Elian into his lap. His hands were everywhere, cupping Elian's face, running down his arms, checking for injuries that weren't there. "Did he touch you?" Dominic demanded, his gray eyes searching Elian's face frantically. "Did that bastard put his hands on you?" "No, Dom, I'm fine," Elian said, resting his forehead against Dominic's chest, listening to the rapid thud of the Alpha's heart. He just said words. Hurtful words, but I'm okay." "Words can bleed you dry, Elian," Dominic growled, burying his nose in Elian's neck, inhaling his scent deeply to calm himself. "I should have killed him right there. The moment I saw him looking at you with that sneer, it took everything I had not to put a bullet between his eyes." "And ruin the carpet?" Elian tried to joke, though his voice was weak. He pulled back slightly to look at his husband. "You were late. You said there was a pest." Dominic's expression darkened. The tenderness vanished, replaced by the hardened look of the dawn. He reached for a decanter of whiskey built into the car's console and poured a glass, downing it in one swallow. "Luca Moretti is back in town," Dominic said, the name sounding like a curse. Elian froze. He knew that name. Dominic didn't talk about work often, trying to keep Elian's life peaceful, but Elian wasn't stupid. He knew Moretti was the head of the rival family that had been exiled 5 years ago. The man with the scar. The man on the balcony, Elian realized, a cold shiver running down his spine. That was him. "Yes," Dominic nodded grimly. "He staged an ambush on the bridge. That's why I was late. We handled it, but him showing up at the party? That wasn't an invitation. That was a threat. He wanted me to know that he can get close to you." Dominic's hand tightened on Elian's thigh, his grip almost painful. "I'm sorry, Elian. I promised you a normal life. I promised to keep you out of this. And tonight, I dragged you right into the center of the target." "You didn't drag me," Elian said firmly, placing his hand over Dominic's. "I went to that party. I walked into the lion's den. You came and saved me." "I will always save you," Dominic swore, looking into Elian's eyes with an intensity that burned. "I would burn this entire city to ash before I let anyone harm a hair on your head." The car convoy sped onto the highway, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. Elian leaned back against Dominic's chest, feeling safe for the first time that evening. But the peace was short-lived. "Boss," the driver shouted, his voice tight with panic. "We've got company. 2 bikes, coming up fast on the rear flank." Dominic's demeanor shifted instantly. He didn't panic, he became ice. He shoved Elian down onto the floor of the SUV. "Stay down," Dominic ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Do not move, no matter what you hear." Dom! Elian cried out as the car swerved violently. Rat-a-tat-tat. The sound of automatic gunfire erupted, deafeningly loud even through the armored glass. Bullets sparked against the side of the SUV. Elian curled into a ball on the plush carpet, covering his head with his arms. He could hear Dominic barking orders into his earpiece, the sound of tires screeching, and the sickening crunch of metal on metal. "Take out the tires," Dominic roared. "Rico, cut them off. Do not let them get alongside us." The car lurched to the left, throwing Elian against the seat. He heard a loud explosion from behind them. One of the escort cars had likely rammed a biker. "They're using armor-piercing rounds," the driver yelled. "The glass won't hold forever, boss." Dominic pulled a sleek, silver handgun from his holster. He didn't look scared, he looked focused. He looked like the Reaper. "Keep driving," Dominic commanded. "Get us to the safe house. I'll handle the trash." He pressed a button, and the window cracked open just an inch. The wind howled into the cabin. Dominic aimed through the crack. He didn't fire wildly. He waited. 1 second. 2 seconds. Bang. A single shot. Through the rear window, Elian, who had lifted his head just slightly, saw one of the motorcycles wobble and skid, crashing into the guardrail in a ball of sparks. "One down," Dominic said calmly, closing the window. But the second bike was closer now. The rider pulled something from his jacket. A grenade. "Hold on," the driver screamed. The explosion rocked the SUV. The back right tire blew out. The heavy vehicle spun out of control, sliding across the asphalt. Elian screamed as the world tumbled. The SUV slammed into the concrete median with a bone-jarring crash. Dust and smoke filled the cabin. The ringing in Elian's ears was deafening. "Elian!" Dominic's voice was the first thing he heard. Rough hands were grabbing him, pulling him. "Elian, answer me. Are you hurt?" Elian coughed, blinking his eyes open. The car was tilted at a crazy angle. Dominic was hovering over him, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, dripping onto his cheek. But he didn't seem to notice his own injury. He was frantically patting Elian down. I'm okay," Elian wheezed, his ribs aching. "Dom, you're bleeding." "It doesn't matter," Dominic snapped. He kicked the jammed door open with a powerful thrust of his leg. The cool night air rushed in. "We have to move. Now. They'll circle back." Dominic dragged Elian out of the wreckage. The other 2 SUVs from their convoy had stopped, and Dominic's men were already engaging in a firefight with a black van that had pulled up behind the crash site. Bullets whizzed through the air like angry hornets. "Cover the boss," someone screamed. Dominic didn't wait. He scooped Elian up into his arms, bridal style, and ran. He ran toward the edge of the bridge. Below them was the dark, rushing water of the river, and beyond that, the dense forest of the city outskirts where one of their safe houses was located. "Dom, what are you doing?" Elian panicked, looking over the railing. "The car is a coffin," Dominic panted, his chest heaving. "We can't stay here. We have to jump." "Jump." Elian stared at the black water 50 feet below. "Are you insane?" "Trust me." Dominic looked at him, his eyes fierce. "Do you trust me, Elian?" Bullets pinged off the metal railing next to Elian's head. There was no time. "Yes," Elian whispered, burying his face in Dominic's neck. "I trust you." "Hold your breath," Dominic commanded. And then he jumped. The freefall felt like it lasted forever. The wind rushed past their ears, the sounds of the gunfight fading away. Then, the freezing cold impact of the water. They plunged deep into the darkness. The cold was shocking, paralyzing. But Dominic never let go. His arm was like an iron band around Elian's waist. He kicked powerfully, dragging them both to the surface. They broke the water, gasping for air. The current was strong, but Dominic was stronger. He swam toward the muddy bank, hauling Elian out onto the grass. They collapsed there, shivering, soaked, and exhausted. Elian lay on his back, staring up at the moon, his chest heaving. He turned his head to look at Dominic. The Mafia lord was lying next to him, his expensive suit ruined, his hair plastered to his forehead, blood mixing with river water on his face. And yet, Elian had never seen him look more beautiful. Dominic rolled onto his side, reaching out to touch Elian's face with a trembling hand. "I told you," Dominic whispered, his voice raspy. "I'll always save you." Elian didn't think. He surged forward, crashing his lips against Dominic's in a desperate, freezing kiss. It tasted of river water, blood, and survival. Dominic growled, pulling Elian on top of him, deepening the kiss with a hunger that spoke of how close they had come to losing each other. For a moment, there was no Mafia, no ex-boyfriends, no bullets. Just the 2 of them, alive on the riverbank. But the moment was broken by the sound of a phone ringing. Not Dominic's. His was likely at the bottom of the river. It was Elian's phone, tucked into the waterproof inner pocket of his jacket. Elian pulled away, shivering, and took out the phone. The screen was cracked, but it was glowing. Incoming call, Marcus. Elian stared at the name. Why was he calling now? Dominic saw the name. His eyes narrowed into slits. He took the phone from Elian's hand and answered it, putting it on speaker. Elian. Marcus's voice came through, sounding frantic and breathless. Elian, thank God you picked up. Listen to me. You need to get away from him. You need to get away from Valenti right now. Dominic didn't speak. He just listened, his breathing steady. Elian, are you there? Marcus continued, his voice rising in panic. I just heard my father. He's working with Luca Moretti. They set Valenti up. The engagement party. It was a distraction to get Valenti out in the open. They're going to kill him tonight, Elian. If you're with him, you're dead. Tell me where you are. I can come get you. Dominic looked at Elian. A dark, complicated emotion crossed his face. Betrayal? Surprise? Dominic brought the phone to his lips. He's not going anywhere with you, Marcus, Dominic said, his voice low and deadly. There was a terrified silence on the other end of the line. Valenti, Marcus whispered. You just gave me very interesting information, Marcus, Dominic said, a cruel smirk forming on his lips. Your father is working with Moretti? Good to know. Wait, Marcus started. If you want to live, Dominic interrupted, keep your mouth shut and stay away from my husband. If I see you near him again, I won't just ruin your bank account. I'll ruin your face. Dominic crushed the phone in his hand, ending the call and breaking the device in one motion. He threw the pieces into the river. He looked at Elian. It seems your ex is more involved than we thought, Dominic said, standing up and pulling Elian to his feet. We need to move. The war hasn't just started, Elian. It's already inside our house. End of part 2. Part 3. Blood on the snow. The forest was not silent. To Elian, it sounded like a living thing that wanted them dead. The wind howled through the skeletal branches of the pine trees, and the distant hum of a helicopter rotor cut through the night air like a buzzsaw. Elian stumbled, his foot catching on a hidden root. He would have fallen face first into the freezing mud if not for the iron grip on his arm. Careful, Dominic grunted. His voice was tight, strained. I can walk, Elian gasped, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. Dom, you're limping. I'm fine, Dominic lied. It was a terrible lie. Since they had climbed out of the river, Dominic had been favoring his left side. He was moving slower now, his usually graceful, predatory stride reduced to a heavy, pained trudge. We need to stop, Elian pleaded, grabbing Dominic's sleeve. You're hurt. We need to check. No stopping, Dominic snapped, though he didn't pull away. He looked back, his gray eyes scanning the darkness behind them. Moretti's men will be tracking our heat signatures. If we stop, we die. The safe house is only another mile. Can you make it? Elian looked at the man who had turned his world upside down. Dominic was soaking wet, his expensive suit ruined, mud smeared across his sharp cheekbones. He looked exhausted. And yet, the way he looked at Elian, with that fierce, protective intensity, sparked a fire in Elian's chest that fought back the cold. I can make it, Elian nodded, straightening his spine. Lead the way. That mile felt like a marathon. Every step was a battle against the freezing cold that seeped into their bones. But finally, through the dense thicket of trees, a structure appeared. It wasn't a grand mansion. It was a small, sturdy hunting cabin made of dark timber, half buried in the side of a hill to remain hidden from aerial views. Dominic punched a code into a keypad hidden behind a loose stone near the door. Beep, 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 click. The heavy steel door groaned open. Inside, quickly, Dominic ushered Elian in and slammed the door, locking it with 3 heavy bolts. The silence inside was sudden and ringing. The cabin was cold, but dry. It smelled of cedar and dust. Dominic moved on autopilot. He went to the windows, pulling down heavy blackout shutters. Only then did he allow his shoulders to slump. There are emergency supplies in the trunk by the bed, Dominic said, his voice sounding wet and raspy. Blankets. Dry clothes. Matches. Start a fire, Elian. What about you? Elian asked, rushing to the trunk. I need to secure the perimeter, Dominic muttered. He turned away, leaning heavily against the wall. Elian didn't buy it. He grabbed a handful of wool blankets and a flashlight, clicking it on. He swung the beam toward Dominic. Dom, turn around. Elian, don't. Turn around. Elian shouted, his fear making him bold. Dominic sighed, a defeated sound, and slowly turned. Elian gasped, his hands flying to his mouth. The back of Dominic's suit jacket was shredded. The fabric was soaked, not just with river water, but with dark, slick blood. A piece of shrapnel from the grenade explosion must have hit him. "Oh my God," Elian whispered, rushing forward. "Why didn't you say anything? You walked a mile like this." Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. Dominic gave a weak chuckle that turned into a cough. He winced, his legs finally giving out. He slid down the wall, sitting on the dusty floorboards. "I didn't want to scare you. I'm terrified anyway, you idiot." Elian dropped to his knees beside him. "Let me see. I need to take this off." For the next 20 minutes, the dynamic shifted. The powerful Mafia lord was helpless, and the weak Omega was in charge. Elian's hands, usually steady when restoring delicate antiques, shook slightly as he peeled the ruined fabric away from Dominic's skin. The wound was ugly, a jagged gash across his left shoulder blade. It was deep, but it didn't look like it had hit an artery. "It needs stitches," Elian assessed, trying to keep his voice calm. "Is there a med kit?" "Under the sink," Dominic gritted out, his eyes closed, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold room. "Vodka in the cabinet. For sterilization. And for me." Elian moved fast. He built a fire in the hearth to warm the room, then gathered the supplies. He knelt behind Dominic, cleaning the wound with whiskey. Dominic hissed, his muscles bunching under Elian's hands, but he didn't make a sound. "This is going to hurt," Elian warned, threading the needle. "Do it," Dominic growled. As Elian worked, stitching the skin of the man he had married just hours ago, a strange intimacy settled over them. It was raw and bloody, far from the romance novels Elian used to read, but it was real. "Why?" Elian asked quietly, tying off the last stitch. He bandaged the wound and draped a heavy blanket over Dominic's bare shoulders. "Why what?" Dominic opened his eyes. They were hazy with pain, but still focused on Elian. "Why me?" Elian moved to sit in front of him, crossing his legs. "You're Dominic Valenti. You could have anyone. Alphas, Omegas, royalty movie stars. Why did you marry me? Why did you pick a nobody antique restorer?" Dominic reached out, his large, rough hand cupping Elian's cheek. He ran his thumb over Elian's lower lip. "You think you're a nobody because people like Marcus told you so," Dominic murmured. "But I've been watching you for 3 years, Elian." Elian stiffened. 3 years? But we only met 2 months ago." "I met you 2 months ago," Dominic corrected. "I've known you for 3 years. I saw you at the museum auction. You were arguing with a curator who was trying to sell a fake Ming vase. You were so passionate, so angry that they would disrespect history. You didn't care that he was powerful. You stood your ground." Dominic smiled faintly. "In my world, everyone wears a mask. Everyone lies. But you were pure truth. I promised myself then that I would protect you. But I stayed away because I knew my life was dangerous." "So what changed?" Elian whispered, leaning into Dominic's touch. "Your father died," Dominic said softly. Elian pulled back, confused. "My father died 10 years ago. Heart attack." "No," Dominic shook his head, his expression grim. "That was your stepfather. Your biological father was Carlo Vane." The silence in the cabin was heavier than the storm outside. "Vane," Elian repeated, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. "As in, Senator Vane, Julian's father." "Yes." Dominic revealed the secret that shattered Elian's reality. "You are Julian's half-brother, the illegitimate son. The senator didn't want a scandal, so he paid your mother to disappear. But he kept tabs on you. And when the senator started making deals with Luca Moretti, I found out that Moretti planned to use you." "Use me how?" Elian felt sick. "As leverage," Dominic's voice turned hard. "Or as a sacrifice. If Julian is the golden child, you are the spare. They were going to kidnap you to force the senator's hand in a deal, or kill you to tie up loose ends. I couldn't let that happen. The only way to protect you was to make you untouchable. To make you a Valenti." Elian sat there, processing the information. The rejection he had felt all his life, the feeling of not belonging, it all made sense. And Marcus? Marcus had left him for his brother. "So," Elian's voice trembled. "You married me to save me?" "It was just a job." Dominic sat up, wincing as his wound pulled. He grabbed Elian by the back of the neck and pulled him close, until their foreheads touched. "It started as protection," Dominic confessed, his breath ghosting over Elian's lips. "But Elian, look at me. I didn't plunge into a freezing river for a job. I didn't take a bullet for a strategy. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you fighting for that vase. Tonight was just the excuse I needed to finally claim you." Elian's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked into Dominic's gray eyes and saw no deception, only a burning, terrifying devotion. Dom, Elian whispered. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. He leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't like the desperate kiss by the river. This was slow, tender, and filled with a promise. Dominic hummed, kissing him back with a hunger that made Elian's toes curl. For a while, the war outside didn't exist. There was only the firelight, the smell of wood smoke, and the heat of the Alpha's body. But reality has a way of breaking down doors. A sharp, piercing beep cut through the air. Dominic pulled away instantly, his eyes snapping to the corner of the room. There was a secure satellite laptop on the table. It was flashing red. "That's the emergency line," Dominic said, his tone shifting from lover to Dawn in a split second. He struggled to his feet, clutching the blanket around him. He walked over and opened the laptop. A grainy video feed popped up. It was Rico, Dominic's right-hand man. He looked battered, bleeding from a cut above his eye, sitting in what looked like a moving van. Boss, do you copy?" Rico yelled over the static. "I'm here, Rico." "Report," Dominic commanded. "It's bad, boss. Worse than we thought." Rico wiped blood from his face. "The traitor, it wasn't just the senator. It's inside the family." Dominic went still. "Who?" "It's Capo Bastion." Rico spat the name out. "He disabled the perimeter alarms at the hotel. And boss, he just put out a bounty." "A bounty on me?" Dominic asked calmly. "No," Rico shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "Not on you. On Elian." Elian felt the blood drain from his face. He stepped closer to the laptop. "On me," Elian whispered. $5 million, Rico continued. "Dead or alive. Every hitman, every gang, every lowlife with a gun in Oakhaven is looking for him right now. They're tracking the crash site. They know you're in the woods." Dominic slammed his fist onto the table, making the laptop jump. "Bastion is a dead man walking." "Boss, you need to get out of there," Rico urged. "We intercepted a radio signal. A cleaning crew is 5 minutes out. They have dogs." Dominic looked at Elian. The tenderness was gone, replaced by a ruthless resolve. He grabbed a heavy duffel bag from the corner and tossed it to Elian. "Put these on," Dominic ordered. "Tactical gear. It will protect you from the cold and from scratches." "What are we going to do?" Elian asked, his hands shaking as he pulled out a black Kevlar vest. "Dom, you can barely walk. We can't outrun dogs." "We aren't running anymore," Dominic said. He walked over to a gun rack on the wall that Elian hadn't noticed before. He pulled down a semi-automatic rifle and a shotgun. He checked the chambers with a loud clack-clack. He turned to Elian, holding out a sleek, black 9mm pistol. "Do you know how to use one of these?" Dominic asked. Elian looked at the gun. It looked heavy. Lethal. "No. I restore lamps, Dominic. I don't shoot people." Dominic walked over and pressed the gun into Elian's hand. He closed Elian's fingers around the grip. "Learn," Dominic said, his voice hard but his eyes pleading. "Because tonight, Elian, you are not just an antique restorer. Tonight, you are a mafia wife. And if anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you pull the trigger. Do you understand?" Elian looked at the cold steel in his hand. He looked at the door, where the sound of barking dogs was becoming faintly audible in the distance. He looked at Dominic, who was wounded, bleeding, but standing between Elian and the world. Elian took a deep breath. His grip on the gun tightened. "I understand," Elian said. Dominic nodded, a dark pride flashing in his eyes. He moved to the window, peering through the slats of the shutters. "Turn off the light," Dominic whispered. Elian clicked off the flashlight. The cabin plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the dying embers of the fire. Outside, the crunch of boots on snow got closer. "Come and get it," Dominic whispered into the dark. End of Part 3. Part 4. The Baptism of Fire. The silence inside the cabin was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Outside, the crunch of snow under heavy boots had stopped. The barking had ceased. That was worse. It meant they had released the dogs. Elian crouched behind the heavy oak sofa, the cold steel of the 9mm pistol slippery in his sweating palms. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Across the room, hidden in the shadows of the kitchenette, Dominic was a statue of lethal intent. Despite the blood seeping through the fresh bandages on his shoulder, his aim with the rifle was steady. Crash. The window to the left exploded inward. Glass shards sprayed across the floor like diamonds. Flashbang. Dominic roared, throwing himself flat. Elian curled into a ball, covering his ears just as a blinding white light and a deafening bang rocked the small room. A high-pitched ringing filled his ears. He was disoriented, dizzy, but adrenaline surged through his veins, sharpening his vision. The front door was kicked open. 3 figures in tactical gear stormed in, their flashlight beams cutting through the smoke. They moved with military precision. Crack, crack. Dominic didn't hesitate. 2 shots from his rifle dropped the first 2 intruders instantly. But the third man was fast. He rolled behind the overturned table, firing a burst from his submachine gun. Bullets chewed up the wood of the sofa Elian was hiding behind, sending splinters flying into his hair. "Stay down," Dominic yelled, returning fire to suppress the attacker. Suddenly, a massive shape leaped through the broken window. A German shepherd, snarling and foaming at the mouth, launched itself straight at Dominic. Dominic swung his rifle, catching the dog midair with the buttstock, knocking it aside. But the distraction was all the third mercenary needed. He popped up, aiming his weapon at Dominic's exposed chest. Dominic was still recovering from the recoil, his injured shoulder slowing his reaction time by a fraction of a second. A fraction that would cost him his life. Elian saw it happen in slow motion. The mercenary's finger tightening on the trigger. Dominic's eyes widening, knowing he couldn't move fast enough. "Do it," a voice screamed in Elian's head. "Do it or he dies." Elian didn't think. He didn't breathe. He stood up from behind the sofa, leveled the pistol with both hands, just as Dominic had shown him, and squeezed the trigger. Bang! The kickback surprised him, jerking his arms up. The mercenary jerked violently, a bloom of red appearing on his neck. He gargled, dropping his gun, and collapsed backward onto the floor. Silence returned to the cabin, broken only by the whimpering of the stunned dog and the crackling of the dying fire. Elian stood frozen, the gun smoking in his hand. He stared at the body. He had just killed a man. Elian. Dominic was at his side in an instant. He kicked the mercenary's gun away and grabbed Elian by the shoulders. "Elian, look at me." Dominic's voice was urgent, piercing through the shock. Elian looked up, his eyes wide and vacant. I killed him. I killed him, Dom." "You saved me," Dominic corrected fiercely, shaking him slightly. "You saved my life. He was going to kill me. Do you understand? It was him or me. You made the choice. You did good." Elian dropped the gun, his hands trembling so hard he couldn't make a fist. Dominic pulled him into a crushing hug, burying his face in Elian's neck. He didn't care about the danger, didn't care about the tactical situation. He just needed to hold his husband. "I've got you," Dominic whispered into his hair. "I'm sorry you had to do that. I'm so sorry." "We have to go," Elian whispered back, his voice hollow but steady. He pushed back, looking at Dominic's pale face. "There will be more." Dominic nodded, switching back to soldier mode. "Grab the bag. We're leaving through the back." They slipped out the back door into the biting cold of the forest. The snow was deep, reaching up to their calves. They moved quickly, using the tree line for cover. Dominic led the way, favoring his left leg, his breathing ragged. "Where are we going?" Elian asked, trudging behind him. "There's an old logging road a half-mile north," Dominic gritted out. "The mercenaries came in a van. They must have left a vehicle there to block the exit. We're stealing their car. We're taking what we need to survive." The trek was brutal. Elian's lungs burned with the freezing air. Every shadow looked like a gunman. Every snapping twig sounded like a gunshot. But the image of the man falling in the cabin kept replaying in his mind. He felt sick, but he also felt different. The fear was still there, but the paralysis was gone. He had crossed a line. He was no longer a civilian. He was an accomplice. They reached the logging road 20 minutes later. Sure enough, a black off-road Jeep was parked sideways across the trail, engine idling to keep the heater running. A single guard was leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette, looking bored. Dominic signaled for Elian to stay back behind a large pine tree. He pulled a knife from his belt, a wicked curved blade. "Stay here," Dominic whispered. "Dom, your shoulder," Elian protested. "Quiet." Dominic moved like a ghost. Despite his injuries, he melted into the darkness. Elian watched, heart in his throat, as Dominic circled behind the Jeep. The guard never stood a chance. One moment he was smoking. The next, he was being dragged into the bushes. There was a brief struggle, a muffled sound, and then silence. Dominic emerged a moment later, wiping the blade on his pants. He waved Elian over. "Get in the driver's seat," Dominic ordered, tossing Elian the keys. "Me." Elian blinked. "But you." "I'm losing blood, Elian," Dominic admitted, his voice weak. He leaned against the car door, his face gray in the moonlight. "I can't drive. I need to stitch this back up before I pass out. You have to get us to the city." Elian nodded, swallowing his panic. He helped Dominic into the passenger seat, then climbed behind the wheel. The Jeep smelled of stale tobacco and sweat, but the heater was a blessing. "Where in the city?" Elian asked, putting the car in gear. "Not the penthouse," Dominic murmured, closing his eyes. "Bastian will have it watched. We need to go to the Sanctum." "The Sanctum? The nightclub?" Elian asked. He knew it. It was the most exclusive, underground club in Oakhaven. "Underneath it," Dominic corrected. "It's my command center. Rico will meet us there. Just drive fast, Tesoro. I'm going to rest my eyes for a minute." "Dom, don't you dare fall asleep," Elian shouted, slamming his foot on the gas. The Jeep roared to life, tires spinning on the icy road before catching traction. The drive back to Oakhaven was a blur of high speeds and terror. Elian kept glancing at Dominic. The Mafia lord's head was lolling to the side, his breathing shallow. The makeshift bandage on his shoulder was soaked through again. "Stay with me, Dom," Elian begged, tears blurring his vision. "You promised. You said you'd always save me. You can't die on me now. I killed for you. You don't get to die." Dominic's lips twitched in a faint smile, but his eyes didn't open. Bossy wife. They hit the city limits an hour later. Oakhaven was asleep, unaware of the war happening in its shadows. Elian navigated the back alleys, avoiding the main roads where police, or worse, corrupt cops on Bastion's payroll, might be waiting. He skidded the Jeep to a halt in the alley behind the Sanctum. It was a gritty, graffiti-covered dead end. "We're here," Elian shook Dominic. "Dom, wake up." Dominic groaned, his eyes fluttering open. They were glassy. Code on the door. 7-7-3-4. Elian jumped out, running to the steel service door. He punched in the code. Green light. The door hissed open. He ran back to the Jeep, hauling Dominic out. Dominic was heavy, practically dead weight now. Elian grunted, wrapping his arm around Dominic's waist, dragging him toward the door. "Help! Someone help!" Elian screamed into the dark corridor of the club. Footsteps thundered toward them. 3 men in suits appeared, guns drawn. Elian froze, shielding Dominic with his body. "Don't shoot!" Elian screamed. "It's the dawn." The men lowered their guns instantly, their faces turning pale. "Boss!" One of them, a man with a distinct neck tattoo, rushed forward to take Dominic's weight. "Get the medic. Now." They rushed Dominic down a maze of hallways, deeper underground, past the thumping bass of the club above, into a sterile, white medical bay. Elian was stopped at the door by the guards. "Let me in." Elian shouted, struggling. "He's my husband." "Let him in," a voice commanded from inside. It was Rico. He looked battered, his arm in a sling, but alive. Elian stumbled into the room. Doctors were already cutting Dominic's shirt off, hooking him up to monitors. The steady beep-beep-beep of the heart monitor was the only thing keeping Elian sane. Rico walked over to Elian. He looked at the antique restorer, disheveled, covered in mud, with dried blood on his hands that wasn't his own. "You got him here," Rico said, a note of respect in his voice. "He's alive because of you." "Who is Bastian?" Elian asked, his voice cold, trembling with a rage he had never felt before. He looked at Dominic's unconscious form on the table. "I want to know everything." Rico hesitated, then nodded. He handed Elian a wet towel to wipe his hands. Bastian was the Don's uncle. He thinks Dominic is too soft because he doesn't deal in human trafficking. He wants to take over the family and merge with Moretti. "He put a bounty on me," Elian said, scrubbing the blood off his fingers. "He tried to kill Dominic." "Yes," Rico confirmed. "And now that Dominic is down, Bastian will make his move. He's going to call a meeting of the families tomorrow night. He's going to declare Dominic dead and take the throne." Elian stopped scrubbing. He looked up at Rico. The fear in his amber eyes was gone, replaced by a hardened, diamond-sharp resolve. The boy who restored lamps was gone. The Mafia wife had arrived. "Dominic won't be awake by tomorrow night," Elian said, looking at the doctors working on his husband. "He can't stop him." "No," Rico admitted. "We are leaderless." "No, you're not," Elian said. Rico stared at him. "What?" Elian turned to face the room. He walked over to where Dominic's torn suit jacket lay on a chair. He reached into the pocket and pulled out the signet ring, the symbol of the Valeni power. He slid the heavy ring onto his own thumb. It was too big, but he clenched his fist around it. "Dominic married me," Elian stated, his voice ringing with authority. "By the laws of the family, until he wakes up, his proxy speaks for him. Is that correct?" Rico's eyes widened. "Technically, yes. But Elian, you can't be serious. You can't walk into a meeting with the 5 families. They will eat you alive." Elian looked at his reflection in the glass of the medical bay window. He saw the blood on his cheek. He saw the coldness in his eyes. "Let them try," Elian whispered. "Bastion wants a war. I'll give him one. Rico, get me a suit. A black one." End of Part 4. Part 5. The Mafia Queen Rises. The bathroom mirror in the underground bunker was cracked, splitting Elian's reflection into two distorted halves. One half looked like the terrified antique restorer who just wanted to go home. The other half looked like a stranger, eyes cold, jaw set, blood splattered across his cheek like war paint. Elian turned on the tap. The water ran cold. He scrubbed his face, watching the red swirl down the drain. He scrubbed until his skin was raw, but he couldn't wash away the feeling of the gun's recoil in his hand. He couldn't wash away the image of the mercenary falling. "Elian." Rico's voice came from the doorway. Elian didn't jump. He dried his face with a rough towel and turned around. "Is he stable?" Elian asked, his voice flat. "For now," Rico nodded, his face grim. "The doctors are extracting the bullet fragments. But he's lost a lot of blood. He's in a coma. We don't know when, or if, he will wake up." Elian felt a crack in his chest, a sharp pain that threatened to bring him to his knees. If. He couldn't accept if. Dominic had to wake up. He had promised. "The meeting?" Elian asked, shoving the pain into a deep, dark box in his mind. "Set for midnight," Rico said. "At the Obsidian Tower. Neutral ground. Bastion has called the heads of the 5 families. He's going to announce Dominic's death and claim the territory. If we don't show up, we forfeit everything by default." Rico held up a garment bag. "I couldn't find a suit in your size down here. But Dominic keeps a spare set of his formal wear in the office." Elian walked over and unzipped the bag. It was a 3-piece suit, black as midnight, tailored from Italian silk. It smelled of him. Sandalwood, gunpowder, and that deep, rich alpha scent that made Elian's Omega instincts scream safety. "It will be too big," Elian whispered, touching the fabric. "Then we make it fit," Rico said. "You have to wear it, Elian. You have to wear him. To them, you are just a rumor. A weakness. You need to show them you are the armor." The Obsidian Tower, midnight. The conference room on the top floor of the Obsidian Tower was a fortress of glass and steel, floating above the city lights. A massive round table made of black marble dominated the room. Seated around it were the 4 most dangerous men in the city, the heads of the other crime syndicates. And at the head of the table, sitting in Dominic's chair with a smug, predatory grin, was Bastion Valenti, Dominic's uncle. Standing behind Bastion, looking nervous and sweating in a cheap suit, was Marcus. "Gentlemen," Bastion announced, spreading his hands. "It is with a heavy heart that I confirm the rumors. My nephew, Dominic, was attacked tonight. He did not survive." A murmur went around the table. Some looked relieved, others calculating. "It is a tragedy," Bastion continued, his voice dripping with fake sorrow. "Dominic was weak, reckless. He let his lust for a lowborn boy cloud his judgment, and it got him killed. But fear not, the Valenti family will not fall. I am stepping up to restore order. And my first act will be to partner with the Vane family," he gestured to Marcus, "to unite our political and street power." Marcus straightened up, trying to look important. "My father, the senator, sends his regards. We believe this alliance will be profitable for everyone." "Wait," one of the other Dons, a heavy-set man named Don Russo, spoke up. "Dominic was married. Doesn't the spouse have rights to the seat until a body is produced?" Bastion laughed. A cruel, barking sound. "The spouse? You mean the little lamp polisher? The charity case? Please. The boy is probably dead in a ditch somewhere, or crying in a police station. He is a nobody. He has no claim. I wouldn't be so sure about that." The voice came from the shadows near the elevator doors. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. The heavy double doors swung open. Elian walked in. He wasn't wearing the clothes of a victim. He was wearing Dominic's suit. The jacket was slightly oversized, hanging off his shoulders like a cloak, but it didn't make him look small. It made him look consumed by the darkness he now represented. He had rolled the sleeves up to reveal his forearms, and on his right thumb, the massive Valenti signet ring glinted under the harsh lights. Rico and 3 other heavily armed guards flanked him, but Elian walked a step ahead. His head was high, his eyes dry and burning with a golden fire. The room went dead silent. Marcus's jaw dropped. Bastion's smile faltered. "You," Bastion sneered, standing up. "You're alive. Disappointed?" Elian asked, his voice smooth and cold. He walked straight toward the head of the table. "You have no business here, boy," Bastion growled. "This is a meeting for men. For leaders. Go back to your toys." Elian didn't stop. He reached the head of the table where Bastion was standing. He didn't look up at the larger man. He looked through him. "You are sitting in my husband's chair," Elian stated. "Your husband is dead," Bastian shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "Is he?" Elian asked, tilting his head. "Funny. I was just holding his hand. He's very much alive, uncle. And he sends his regards." It was a bluff. A massive, dangerous bluff. But Elian delivered it with such conviction that doubt flickered in the eyes of the other dons. "He lies." Marcus piped up, his voice cracking. "My father's men saw the crash. No one could survive that." Elian slowly turned his head to look at Marcus. It wasn't the look of a heartbroken ex. It was the look of a predator acknowledging a fly. "Marcus," Elian said softly, "I see you're still fetching coffee for powerful men. Tell me, how does it feel to know that while you were planning engagement parties, I was planning a war?" You're nothing," Marcus stammered, but he took a step back. "You're just Elian. Boring Elian." "Elian Valenti," Elian corrected him. He turned back to Bastian. "Get out of the chair." Bastian's face turned purple. "I will not take orders from a whore. Guards, remove this trash." Bastian's 2 bodyguards stepped forward, reaching for their guns. Click-clack. Before they could even unholster their weapons, a dozen red laser dots appeared on their chests. The other dons looked up. High above, on the glass mezzanine overlooking the conference room, 10 of Dominic's most loyal snipers. Men Rico had rallied were aiming their rifles. "I wouldn't," Elian said calmly. "My husband taught me that it's rude to bring a knife to a gunfight. So I brought an army." Bastian froze. He looked at the lasers, then at Elian. For the first time, he saw fear. Not his own, but the realization that he had miscalculated. The boy wasn't weak. "Now," Elian said, his voice dropping an octave, "I will ask you one last time. Get out of my chair." Bastian, humiliated and outgunned, slowly moved aside. The room watched in stunned silence as Elian, the antique restorer, sat down at the head of the most powerful table in the underworld. He didn't slouch. He sat with the grace of a king. "Now that the trash has been taken out," Elian said, resting his hands on the table, the black diamond ring catching the light, "let's talk business." "You expect us to follow you?" Don Russo asked, skeptical but intrigued. "A boy with no experience?" "Experience." Elian laughed softly. It was a dark, humorless sound. "Tonight I was ambushed. I was shot at. I jumped off a bridge. And I put a bullet in the brain of a mercenary who tried to kill my family. I am still standing. My husband is still breathing. And the traitor who orchestrated it," Elian's eyes snapped to Bastian, "is standing right there." Elian reached into the inner pocket of Dominic's suit jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a weapon. It was a bank transfer receipt Rico had found on the mercenary's phone. "This is a transfer of $5 million from an offshore account." Elian slid the paper across the table to Don Russo. "The account belongs to Bastian Valenti. The recipient is Luca Moretti." Gasps rippled through the room. Trafficking with Moretti was forbidden by the Five Families Code. It was a death sentence. "You sold us out to Moretti?" Russo stood up, his face furious, looking at Bastian. "You brought an exile back into our city?" "It's a lie," Bastian screamed, backing away. "He faked it. The metadata is verified," Elian said coldly. Bastian didn't just try to kill Dominic. He tried to sell this entire council to Moretti. He was going to open the gates and let the wolves in. Elian stood up slowly. He picked up a silver steak knife from the fruit platter on the table. He wasn't a fighter, but he held it with purpose. "The penalty for treason is death." Elian recited the law Dominic had told him once, jokingly, over dinner. "Isn't that right, gentlemen?" The other dons nodded slowly. They turned their backs on Bastian. Bastian looked around wildly. "Marcus, do something. Call your father." Marcus was trembling, so hard he dropped his phone. He looked at Elian with pure terror. "Elian, please. I didn't know. You chose your side, Marcus," Elian said dismissively. "Rico." "Yes, boss." Rico stepped forward. "Take Bastian into custody. Hold him in the cellar. When Dominic wakes up, he will want to handle family matters personally." "No, you can't do this." Bastian screamed as Rico's men grabbed him and dragged him out of the room. "I am a Valenti. You are nothing. Nothing." The doors slammed shut, cutting off his screams. Elian stood alone at the head of the table. His legs were shaking, but the table hid them. He looked at the remaining dons. "The Valenti family remains strong," Elian declared, his voice steady. "Any attack on us will be met with fire. Are we clear?" "Clear," Don Russo nodded, a newfound respect in his eyes. "Hail to the Don." Elian didn't correct him. He just nodded. As the meeting adjourned and the Dons filed out, Elian collapsed back into the chair. The adrenaline crashed. He felt dizzy. He wanted to vomit. "You did it," Rico whispered, awe in his voice. "My God, Elian. You owned the room." "Take me to the hospital," Elian whispered, clutching the ring on his finger. "I need to see him. I need to tell him." Ring. Ring. Rico's phone buzzed. He answered it. Elian watched Rico's face. He saw the blood drain from the capo's skin. He saw the phone slip from his fingers. "Rico?" Elian asked, panic rising in his throat. "Rico, what is it? Is it Dominic? Did he?" "Elian," Rico choked out. "The hospital." There was an explosion. Elian's heart stopped. "Moretti," Rico whispered. "We thought the attack was over. But Bastion was just the distraction. Moretti just bombed the intensive care unit." Elian didn't scream. He didn't cry. The world just turned gray. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Get the car," Elian said. His voice wasn't human anymore. It was the voice of a ghost. "Elian, it's a war zone," Rico warned. "I said get the car." Elian roared, grabbing the silver knife from the table and slamming it into the wood. "If he is dead, if they took him from me, I will kill them all. I will kill every last one of them." He walked toward the elevator, the oversized black coat billowing behind him like the wings of a dark angel. The antique restorer was dead. The Mafia queen had risen, and he was out for blood. End of Part 5. Part 6. The King and His Queen. The smell of smoke was acrid, burning the back of Elian's throat. The night sky above Oakhaven was stained orange by the flames licking up the side of the hospital wing. Sirens wailed, a cacophony of despair that matched the screaming in Elian's soul. "Dominic!" Elian screamed, pushing against the chest of a firefighter who was holding him back. "Let me go. He's in there. My husband is in there." "Sir, it's not safe. The structure is unstable," the firefighter yelled, struggling to hold the frantic young man back. Elian was sobbing, his tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. He was wearing the oversized black suit of the Mafia Don, but right now, he felt like a child who had lost everything. He had finally found someone who loved him, someone who saw him, and now ashes. "Elian." A hand grabbed his shoulder. It wasn't a firefighter. It was Rico. The capo looked frantic, holding a phone to his ear. "Rico, he's dead," Elian choked out, collapsing into Rico's arms. "Moretti killed him. I failed. Listen to me." Rico shook him hard. He wasn't there. The nurse, one of our loyal staff, she moved him. She moved him to the basement morgue 10 minutes before the blast because she saw a janitor acting suspiciously. "Elian, he's alive. He's in the transport van now." Elian stopped breathing. The world stopped spinning. "Alive." "Alive," Rico confirmed, grinning through the grime on his face. "Unconscious, but alive. We are taking him to the safe house in the mountains. You should go with him." Elian straightened up. The despair evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, white-hot fury. He looked at the burning building. He looked at the chaos Moretti had caused. "No," Elian whispered. "No." Rico blinked. "Elian, you need to be safe." "Moretti thinks he won," Elian said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "He thinks Dominic is dead. He thinks I am broken. He is probably celebrating right now." Elian turned to Rico. The amber eyes that used to be so gentle were now hard as diamonds. "Where is Moretti?" Rico hesitated. "Our intel says he's at the Vane estate. The senator is hosting a victory dinner." "The Vane estate," Elian repeated. "The home of his biological father. The home where his brother Julian lived. The place where his ex-boyfriend Marcus was undoubtedly groveling." Elian walked over to the black SUV where his personal guard was waiting. He opened the trunk and pulled out the semi-automatic rifle Dominic had taught him to hold just 24 hours ago. "Take Dominic to safety," Elian commanded Rico. "Keep him alive." "Where are you going?" Rico asked, though he already knew the answer. Elian racked the slide of the rifle. Click-clack. "I'm going to introduce myself to my father," Elian said, "and I'm going to burn his house down." The Vane estate. The dining room of Senator Vane's mansion was opulent, dripping with gold and crystal. At the head of the table sat the senator, a silver-haired man with a cruel mouth. To his right was Luca Moretti, the scarred exile, laughing as he swirled a glass of vintage wine. To his left were Julian and Marcus. "To a new era," the senator raised his glass. "With Valenti dead, the city is ours, and the contract for the new port is finally mine. And to me," Moretti grinned, his teeth yellow, "for pulling the trigger." "I still can't believe he's gone," Marcus muttered, looking pale. "And Elian, what happened to him?" Who cares? Julian giggled, feeding Marcus a grape. He's probably crying in a gutter. He's homeless now. Crash. The massive oak front doors of the mansion didn't just open, they exploded inward. The sound of flashbang grenades filled the foyer. Security. Moretti roared, reaching for his gun. But his security was already dead. Elian walked into the dining room. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood 20 of the Valeni family's most elite enforcers, weapons raised. But Elian didn't hide behind them. He walked in front, the black coat billowing, the rifle resting casually in his hands. The room froze. The senator dropped his glass. Wine spilled across the white tablecloth like blood. Elian, Marcus whispered, his eyes bulging. Evening, gentlemen, Elian said. His voice was conversational, which made it all the more terrifying. Sorry I'm late. I was busy watching my husband's hospital burn. You. The senator stood up, trembling. You shouldn't be here. You are trespassing. Trespassing. Elian laughed softly. He walked closer, the muzzle of his rifle drifting to point directly at the senator's chest. I think family is always welcome, isn't that right? Father. Julian gasped. Marcus looked from Elian to the senator in shock. Father, you didn't tell them? Elian asked, tilting his head. You didn't tell your precious Julian that he has a big brother? You didn't tell Marcus that he dumped the senator's son to date. The senator's son. The senator's face went gray. You are a bastard. You are nothing. I am Elian Valenti, Elian corrected. And I am the one who is going to end you. Moretti, seeing an opening, lunged for his gun on the table. Bang! Elian didn't flinch. He fired a single shot. The wine bottle in front of Moretti shattered, sending glass flying into the mobster's face. Moretti screamed, clutching his eyes. The next one goes in your throat, Luca, Elian warned. Sit. Down. Moretti sat, blood trickling down his face. Elian turned his gaze to Marcus. Marcus was shaking, tears streaming down his face. Elian, please, Marcus sobbed. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the bomb. I still love you, Elian. We can try again. Now that you're rich. Elian looked at Marcus with pure disgust. You don't love me, Marcus. You love power. And you see this ring. Elian held up his hand. You see this army? You think this makes me attractive? It makes me your executioner. Enough of this theater. The senator roared. You won't shoot me. I am a senator. I am your father. You were a donor, Elian spat. Dominic is my family. Dominic is dead. The senator shouted. Is he? The voice came from the doorway. It was weak, raspy, but it carried the weight of a thunderstorm. Elian spun around, his heart hammering. Leaning against the doorframe, supported by Rico and a doctor, was Dominic. He was pale as a sheet, his shoulder heavily bandaged, and 4 drip hanging from a pole next to him. He looked like death warmed over. But he was standing, and he was smiling at Elian. Dom. Elian dropped his rifle, running across the room. He collided with Dominic gently, wrapping his arms around his waist, burying his face in his chest. You idiot. You were supposed to be safe. And miss the party? Dominic groaned, kissing the top of Elian's head. Rico told me my husband was going to kill the senator. I wanted a front row seat. Dominic looked up, his gray eyes locking onto the terrified group at the table. You missed, Dominic said to Moretti. Moretti whimpered. Rico, Dominic commanded softly. Kill Moretti. Slowly. 2 guards grabbed Moretti and dragged him screaming from the room. Senator, Dominic continued, you are going to resign. You are going to confess to corruption, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder. You will spend the rest of your life in a very small cell. Or what? The senator sneered, though his confidence was broken. You'll kill me. No, Dominic smiled, and it was a cruel thing. My husband decides your fate. Dominic looked down at Elian. What do you want to do with them, Tesoro? Elian pulled back, wiping his tears. He looked at the senator, the man who abandoned him. He looked at Julian, the brother who mocked him. He looked at Marcus, the ex who betrayed him. He felt nothing. No hate. No love. Just indifference. They were small. They didn't matter. Let them live, Elian decided. What? Marcus gasped, hope lighting up his eyes. Let them live, Elian repeated. But take everything. Senator, I want your assets frozen. I want your career over. Julian, you will work for a living. And Marcus. Elian walked up to Marcus. He leaned in close. You will live knowing that you had the king and the queen in the palm of your hand, and you threw it away for a discount. Elian turned his back on them. Let's go home, Dom. Epilogue, 6 months later. The morning sun filtered through the bulletproof glass of the penthouse suite, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Elian stood on the balcony, overlooking the city of Oakhaven. He held a cup of coffee in his hand. He wasn't wearing a thrifted suit. He was wearing a silk robe that cost more than his old apartment. Strong arms wrapped around him from behind. A chin rested on his shoulder. Thinking about the past, Dominic murmured, his voice thick with sleep. The scar on his shoulder had healed, a permanent reminder of the night their lives changed. No, Elian smiled, leaning back into his husband's warmth. I was thinking about the auction tonight. There's a Ming vase I want to buy. Buy the whole museum. Dominic kissed his neck. You're the boss. I'm not the boss, Elian laughed, turning in his arms. You are the Dawn. I am the Dawn, Dominic agreed, his eyes darkening with love. He lifted Elian's hand, kissing the black diamond ring. But you, Elian, you are the power behind the throne. You are the one they fear. It was true. In 6 months, Elian had reorganized the family's finances, legitimized their businesses, and secured peace with the neighboring cities. They called him the Silencer. Not because he killed often, but because when he spoke, everyone stopped to listen. Marcus was working as a valet at a cheap hotel downtown. The senator was in prison. Julian was a bartender. They were memories. Elian looked at Dominic, the man who had pulled him from the shadows and given him a kingdom. No husband yet? Elian teased, echoing the words that had started it all. Dominic laughed, picking Elian up effortlessly. I have a husband, and he is dangerous. Only if you mess with his lamps, Elian grinned. Dominic carried him back inside, away from the city, away from the power, into the privacy of their life. They had walked through fire, blood, and ice to find each other. And now they owned the world. End of story.